the starting point for this, the context is that we've got a road safety problem. The last couple of years, we've seen over 180 fatalities on our roads in WA and around 1,400 serious injuries.
I think one of the biggest things that's changed in the last 20 odd years is just the population increase. So we've got a lot more people around now, we've got a lot more people driving, but we've also got a lot more people wanting to walk and ride.
When we're thinking about residential streets, then they're not just roads, they have houses on them, people live there, neighbours meet, kids play, people want to walk and ride around their local neighbourhoods, get to services and so forth.
We've been working with the Inner City Council now for a number of years to look at all the local roads, where the local access roads where people live, kids play, walk and ride to school. People realised that those slow speeds were beneficial. It created a calmer, nicer streets.
So is 40 kilometres an hour something to be afraid of?
Not at all.
Back in 2001, Western Australia lowered the speed limit on local streets from 60 to 50 kilometres an hour, and the results were dramatic, with pedestrian crashes in Perth cut in half and dozens of lives saved in the first few years alone. Today we're diving into the debate around slower speeds, the evidence behind them, and why the issue is gaining momentum across Perth and around the world. Here with me today is PJA Transport Planner Tim Judd and RAC Manager Road Safety Policy David Elston. Welcome to you both. Tim, let's start with you. You're Project Manager with the Perth Inner City Safety Speed Zone project, which has been advocating for 40 kilometres an hour for a number of the inner city councils. Tell me what that might look like.
Yeah, so we've been working with the Inner City Council now for a number of years to look at all the local roads, where the local access roads where people live, kids play, walk and ride to school, to really make them safer and more enjoyable and more relaxed spaces to go. So we're going through a process at the moment to reduce the posted speed limits to 40k an hour.
So we're talking local roads, and I believe City of Vincent has been the first of these local councils. Can you tell me their experience?
Yeah, so they started off working with the wider Perth Inner City Council group, collectively all advocating for safer speeds on local roads. And then through that advocation, they had a discussion with the Road Safety Commission, and they came up with an agreement to trial what 40 kilometres an hour would look like on local roads, just for an area within the North Perth area, to actually gather data and understand what it means for people living and working on these streets, and also visitors attending.
So that was a couple of years ago. Along came COVID, things changed. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, so I think the trial initially was probably only planned for about a year, back in 2018-19 time. COVID happened, obviously the lockdown. People wanted to get out and walk and ride more and get outside more when they're allowed to. So the trial just stayed in place, and those slower speeds remained. And as we came out of lockdown, and as we started to get back into more of our ordinary daily lives, people realised that those slow speeds were beneficial. It created a calmer, nicer streets. And when we went back out to community to speak to them about their experience, their attitude had changed a lot, and said, actually, yes, we really like it and would like it to stay.
So that point about attitude, I think, is interesting. Tell me how attitudes have shifted in the areas that you've seen, but also what you think those perceptions are based on.
I think one of the biggest things that's changed in the last 20 odd years is just the population increase. So we've got a lot more people around now, we've got a lot more people driving, but we've also got a lot more people wanting to walk and ride. We have an ageing population who, from a health perspective, would like to stay active and be able to just walk down to the local shops. We need our children to be more active and start walking and riding to school more. So I think there's a general change in people's understanding of that, and understanding that slower speeds on local roads can help encourage that more active lifestyle.
Fantastic. David, I'm going to bring you in here. You have long advocated for lower speeds and safer speeds in some areas. Can you tell me a little bit about how a reduction in speed makes a difference in road safety?
Yes, I guess the starting point for this, the context is that we've got a road safety problem. The last couple of years, we've seen over 180 fatalities on our roads in WA and around 1,400 serious injuries. We're seeing a substantial number, around 300 deaths and serious injuries per year on those 50k an hour roads. So yes, we see some on high speed roads, but also on those lower speed roads as well. in the first 4.5 months of 2026, we've seen 14 pedestrian fatalities already. And there's actually been a trend in the last couple of years towards more metropolitan fatalities than in the past. So we've got a problem. We know that there's an ambitious state road safety strategy to try and reduce deaths and serious injuries by 50 to 70% by 2030 from 2020 levels. And we also know that probably the single most effective way that we can achieve that is through setting safe and appropriate speed limits. Now, there's a few factors at play behind that. So we know there's lots of things that come together to cause a crash. But if a crash is potentially going to happen, first thing that speed can do is give you more of a chance to avoid that crash. So that's the first important role it plays. So if you are traveling at a lower speed, it's easier to control the vehicle. You travel shorter distance while you're reacting, and then the actual physical braking distance of the car is shorter as well. So, for example, if you're going at a speed of 50 k's an hour, you're looking at about a 35-meter stopping distance altogether in dry conditions. Whereas once you reduce it to 40 k's an hour, that comes down to 26 meters. So that obviously can make a difference between having a crash or avoiding a crash. Importantly, though, even if you do still crash, if you've had time to brake, you substantially reduce your vehicle's speed, and that reduces the impact speed. And actually, I guess the most important consideration around speed is actually its impact on your chances of surviving a crash if one does occur. And this sort of draws on physics. So if you remember sort of high school physics, you might know a formula for kinetic energy, sort of equal to half mass times velocity squared. And that squared element is very important. So what that means is if you double your speed, you quadruple your kinetic energy. Our human bodies are fragile. Even if you're within a car, you can only withstand so much energy and force when a crash happens. If you're outside a car, if you're walking, if you're cycling, you don't have any protection. So therefore, that impact, I guess, it's likely to have a more severe outcome. So the opportunity of reducing speed limits is to reduce that kinetic energy. And that gives people a much greater chance of survival. For example, if a car hits a pedestrian at 50 k's an hour, there's around a 20% chance they're going to survive, realistically. Once you drop that speed to 40 k's an hour, that jumps up to around 60%. So even fairly modest reductions in travel speeds can substantially reduce deaths and serious injuries.
So if you're a driver of a car and there's potentially a child runs out in front of you, by driving a bit slower, you've got more time to react. Yeah. You've got more time to put the brakes on. You're going to stop faster. The distance isn't as far, so you've got more time to come up to that crash. And even if you were then to have a collision with a pole or a person or a bike, you're hitting them at a lower speed.
Yeah.
So really, there's a number of things that then go into reducing that improvement in survivability.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so it's not about was speed the only thing that caused the crash. It's about how speed can help minimize the chances of the crash actually happening, and if a crash does happen, how the lower speed can help prevent people being killed and seriously injured.
David, one of the challenges here is trying to demonstrate a negative. You're trying to say that had we not done this, more people would have died. But the fact that those lives have been saved makes it sometimes hard to prove. So talk to me about survivability. How do we know when we talk about physics, how does the speed of a car change the survivability of being in a crash if you're a pedestrian?
Lots of researchers have done work to investigate the impact of both of different impact speeds and also changes in speed limits to actually try and quantify what impact they have. When we look at survivability for pedestrians, through analysing a whole range of crashes where pedestrians have been hit, people can derive data in terms of what the risk is of being killed, and that indicates that at a speed of about 50 kilometers an hour, your you've got about a 20% chance of survival. Once the impact speed is 40 k's an hour, that increases to 60%. And then once the speed comes down to 30 kilometers an hour, you've got a 90% chance of the pedestrian surviving that crash. And there are similar sorts of analysis for different kinds of car crashes as well, whether it's a side impact car crash or a head-on car crash. We know there's up to a certain point, vehicles can protect people so that you've got a high chance of surviving the crash. Once the impact speed goes much above that, the chance of being killed increases dramatically. And that gives us great guidelines when we're setting speed limits to think about setting them at a level that reflects the types of crashes that might happen on a particular road. So on a residential street where there are lots of people walking and riding around, we've got to be thinking about the risk of hitting a pedestrian. On those higher speed roads, the focus might be more on those side impact crashes with other vehicles or those head-on crashes and how we set speed limits to minimise those risks. But lots of international studies looking at the impacts of change in travel speeds on the likelihood of death and serious injury, and those are pretty consistent across different countries and time periods. So there's good data to be able to model those things. So, for example, if travel speeds drop by 10 kilometers an hour, you often see a 30% reduction in deaths and serious injuries, and that holds, as I say, across a whole range of studies. So that gives you good guidelines around what you might achieve when you change speed limits.
And I think that comes back to a point you made earlier, which is that in WA in 2026, there have been a high number of fatalities in the metro area involving pedestrians or cyclists. And some of those really are just come down to the speed at which the car that hits them is travelling.
Yeah, correct. So, certainly if you're hit by a car at a high speed as a pedestrian, your survival chances, as we mentioned, are pretty low, particularly if the driver hasn't had much time to react. If the driver sees you well in advance and has time to slow down, then you might be okay. But if you're hit at that high speed, or if the driver doesn't see you at all, then the outcome's likely to be very severe.
When you look at safer speeds, obviously the safety argument is a very, very strong one. But there are other arguments that are put forward for why we might reduce the speeds on local roads. And I should clarify, local roads, we're not talking about the thoroughfares, the multi-lane roads that cut through suburbs, but these are really the places that people live and play. What are some of the advantages of reducing speed on small, suburban, quieter roads?
Yes, as you say, when we're thinking about residential streets, then they're not just roads. They have houses on them. People live there. Neighbours meet. Kids play. People want to walk and ride around their local neighbourhoods, get to services and so forth. So, lower speed limits provide a number of benefits. They reduce vehicle noise, and we all know when you're in your house, you don't want to hear lots of loud traffic outside. They create a more inviting environment for people actually to be outside on their streets. If you've got cars going past at high speed, that's not a pleasant environment to be around. Whereas once those speeds are calmed, it's more pleasant to be around. It also feels safer. It feels safer to let your kids, for example, be walking along the street if traffic's not going at such high speeds. And that obviously can promote more physical activity and general well-being from being out and about and being able to explore your local neighbourhood.
Tim, you've seen a number of councils going down this path and considering either consulting with their community about it or perhaps starting a trial that's very similar to this. Are those the arguments that sway local government as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think demonstrating it, we can all talk in theory and theorise over things, but if we actually demonstrate what it can mean on the ground, we do trials, we test it, we measure it, and we have actual tangible outcomes that can demonstrate that it has been a success and it does help. Reducing speeds on local roads means that you can have more physical infrastructure on the road, such as trees and benches and things to really make the street more pleasant for people, to shade footpaths for people, for places for people to stop and rest, because the traffic's travelling slower and it's more calmer, and therefore these infrastructure on the street like trees and benches are less of a hazard than on the side of the street.
One of the ways that a lot of local governments have tried to manage this is to have almost a piecemeal approach to lower speeds, where you might have temporary lower speed limits at certain times of day, or you might have corridors where it goes 60-40, 60-40. How does this, having a default speed limit, particularly on local roads, make that not such an issue?
Well, I think changing the speed limit on local roads on a network-wide approach ensures that it becomes more intuitive to the general public, so that when they're travelling on like-for-like streets, and I guess one distinction we can start to have is the distinction between maybe what a road is versus what a street is and what that means to people. If we can start looking at local access streets and changing the streets to 40 km an hour on a network-wide basis, then the general public will realise and get to understand more that every time they're on a local street, it looks and feels like a local residential street, that the speed limit is 40 and not 50. And we'll also have that through signage as well, so there'll be signs up to indicate that it's 40 kilometres an hour. You will still have longer corridors where the land use responsiveness to the street changes, and so the speed limit would have changed according to the adjacent land use. But for local access roads, for local streets, on a network-wide scale, it will become more intuitive to people to adopt 40 kilometres an hour.
What kind of local roads are we describing?
I think for within Perth Metropolitan, where we were describing local streets, residential streets, where people are living and children are playing. So you'll just imagine a normal everyday residential street. They're the sort of streets where there's no reason for anyone to be driving fast along there. Essentially, once you've turned onto the street, you're home or you're close to the person you're visiting, so driving at a bit of a slower speed doesn't impact anybody, and it just creates much of a nicer outcome. So when we're talking about these sort of area-wide 40 kilometre an hour streets, we're talking about those local residential streets that people are living on. And usually the process is, historically, has been that people have actually, so I'm formerly from a local council myself, and the complaints we always used to receive is people speeding in our streets, or rat running and inappropriate traffic volumes, or hooning behaviour and that sort of thing. So people have recognised this for years and years and years, and they complain to the local council, and local council would usually just take that reactive approach to go and measure it, see if it is an issue, see what they can be done about it. Reducing speeds on a network scale for local streets means we can be more proactive and try and encourage people to drive at those more slower, sensible speeds before people start complaining about them. And it's the same with the Safer Speeds trial in the southwest as well, doing it on a network-wide scale to really look at how we can proactively reduce speeds and create safer streets and safer roads before people start complaining about inappropriate speeds or before people are being killed or seriously injured.
When we hear from the community, there are a number of different perspectives, but some people are very much in favour of this, would like it to go on their local road, would like to see it in their local area. Why do you think there is such a diversity of views?
Absolutely. I think we've heard very strong voices for safer speeds on local streets. We've responded to that through the Perth Inner City Group, and we're looking at implementing that. And I think the diversity of views often comes from a person's stage in life as well. I think maybe a person that's a single person, adult, or just in a couple in a relationship, they generally, not everyone, would think about themselves and how they behave and how they would like to travel and how they think they're a safe driver and they can drive at what speed they want. But we've seen as people change, as they have kids themselves, or maybe as they have older parents that they have to then start caring for, and want to be out on the street more with the children or with the older people. We've seen attitudes change to realise, yes, I realise now that walking down the street and having to hold my child's hand really, really tightly in case it runs into the road is not a street that I really want to live on. I would like to be able to walk down the street with my child skipping ahead of me and know that it's generally okay and generally safe. So I think how people change in their life is change their attitudes to speed.
So it's a change in approach from what people may be used to, whereby a speed limit on a road might be changed because there've been some high-profile crashes, somebody killed or seriously injured on the road, or lots of community complaints, and then that specific road was addressed, but the rest of the network might have been left as it was, and then a couple of years later another road might have an issue. with this more holistic approach, we're trying to reduce the risk across all of those local streets. So therefore, we're being proactive and hopefully preventing those death and serious injuries happening in the first place. So it's not that the roads that have reduced speed limit have some unique characteristics that mean that they're chosen. It's that they fall into a category of street where we want to ensure a safe environment for everyone that uses those streets.
Well, let's look at maybe some of the misperceptions or at least people's idea of what this might mean. And David, I know one of the things that people say is that if you reduce the speed on local roads, you will take longer to get places. How true is that?
So when we're talking about in urban areas, your local residential streets, what we find is that people typically are only driving for very short distances on those roads. Either they're doing a local journey and it's only a few minutes, or else they're on those streets briefly and then they're joining a more major arterial road to travel to a different part of Perth. So the actual, amount of time to begin with on those streets is very small, and therefore if there isn't a slight increase in journey time, it's normally pretty minimal. We also see on a lot of these streets, people, and not everybody is driving at 50 k's an hour to begin with. These are short streets. They have intersections. You often have to sort of come to a stop and then accelerate again and slow down again. There's other vehicles around. There's sometimes other parked cars and so forth that you have to navigate around. So people are not driving 50 k's an hour all the time on these streets. So by lowering the speed limit, what you're doing is you're discouraging those higher end speeds. But the impact on the average driver is not huge. They'll probably reduce their travel speed by a few k's an hour, but the impact on journey time probably negligible and unlikely to really notice it.
But it's interesting that when you actually look at the average speed that cars travel in Perth, most of the time it is not at the posted speed limit. It's below the posted speed limit. And in some cases, in peak hour, you can be travelling at 27 or 29 kilometres an hour through heavy traffic. So is 40 kilometres an hour something to be afraid of?
Not at all. The reason why Vincent did that trial in the first place, and then following the trial, the 3-year review, looking at actual journey times on the ground and how it's affected people's journey times, is it doesn't affect people's journey times at all in free flow conditions. You can still drive and get to the next higher order road or your destination within the time. It's nothing for anyone to be afraid of. It's not part of any big conspiracy to do anything more than just create nice, more amenable streets for everybody to live on, children, older people, and everyone in between.
And David, is this one of those situations where I think everybody would be happy for slower speeds on their street, but they don't want to drive it on someone else's?
That could happen in some cases, yeah. I think an important part of this also is around the ability of the street to be self-explaining and to help to reinforce the speed limit. So people do get frustrated or find it tricky to drive on a road that feels like you should be driving fast on it because it's wide and straight, and then the speed limit sort of doesn't align with that. And that's the experience we often have when we're going through roadwork zones where you're on a major road such as the freeway and there's roadworks and the speed limit's reduced, but because you're on a big freeway, there's sort of it feels very slow suddenly, that lower speed limit. So in this case, 40 k an hour on most local streets will feel reasonable to most people. It doesn't feel ridiculously slow compared with the environment. It feels quite suitable. On any roads where it does feel a bit too slow, that's the ones where we can start looking at traffic calming and some of those other elements that can help make the street environment feel, better aligned with the 40 k an hour.
Fantastic. David mentioned there, Tim, the idea of other traffic calming as well. So could we not just be doing this with raised centres in the middle of the road, other traffic calming measures, narrowing of roads?
Yeah, and that's been a practice that local councils have been doing for years and years and years, is to physically change the road's characteristics to enforce that slower speed that we would like to do. And that's still a valid process that councils go through now, especially where you may reduce the speed of the road, the posted speed of the road, and you still may not be quite getting the people travelling at the speed that you want them to. The issue that we have with that, though, is that can draw out a long process. For one particular road, you may take 2 years to actually get physical devices on the ground because you start to need to design something, speak to the community about it, do that consultation to ensure that the people living and working on that street are happy with the type of approach that the council's going forward. If you do get a consensus and you do get agreement, then you have to take that design to a full detail level to then construct it on the ground. So not only does it take a long time, it also can take quite a lot of cost as well to implement that on the ground, and that's just for one street. Whereas doing it on a network, reducing the posted speed limit on a network-wide approach means we can cover a vast number of streets in one go for a lot less cost.
David, I'd like to ask about one of the trials that is underway, and this isn't a 40 kilometre an hour trial, but it is the Safer Speeds trial that's underway in Margaret River with the backing of RAC. And now it's too early for any formal results, but can you give us the impression about how that trial has been well received? Is it still has it been well received in Margaret River?
Yeah, so bit of context on that trial. So RAC partnered with the Shire of Augusta Margaret River on a holistic a trial, so looking at speed limits across a whole area and then setting speed limits consistently based on a harm minimisation approach, so with a real focus on what do these roads look like now and how can we set a speed limit that's appropriate and is going to minimise the risk of someone being killed or seriously injured. And that came about because the Shire had seen lots of population growth, lots of new developments. We're getting lots of requests to review speed limits, but I guess they didn't have a mechanism to do that holistic review. Hence, we worked with them also with crucial input from Main Roads to review speed limits across their network. Then last year, between May and August, we rolled out those new speed limits. Those cover a range of different road types. So it does cover some of those local streets we've been referring to. So in towns such as Margaret River, Kawarama, Augusta, the residential streets are now 40 k's an hour. But it also covers some of those higher speed rural roads and then some of those roads in between, some of those peri-urban areas. And what we saw, so prior to implementation, we ran a community consultation to get feedback on the proposals. And we had majority support for those 40 k an hour in residential streets, and then sort of particularly high in town centres. About 2/3 supported 40 k's an hour on the sort of main town centre to streets. We are, as part of, I guess the trial is planned to run for 3 years. So started mid-2025, it'll run to mid-2028. There's an opportunity for community to provide input into that, to understand the impacts on them from the trial, their experiences with it, and for them also to raise any issues or concerns with how things are, anywhere where they think that the speed limit might need to be reviewed or adjusted based on their experiences. And that's also in parallel to that, we've commissioned an external evaluation. So we've got metrics from tube counts and TomTom data and a range of other sources to understand how have the speed limit changes impacted on how people are driving and how has that affected the risk of crashes and the number of crashes ultimately. So at this point in time, it's still, I guess, early days in terms of the 3-year trial, and later this year we'll have I guess a full understanding of that 12-month review feedback, and where we might need to make some adjustments if we didn't get things perfect, because as I said, it's 550 roads. So
fantastic. And Tim, if you're in the city, where would you potentially expect to see some of these trials taking place? Obviously, there are a lot of councils are still in this process, but where do you think you might see this taking place in the future?
Well, in the future, hopefully there'll be permanent installations rather than trials still, and we'll be looking at all the local roads within the Perth Inner City Council areas. So the City of Vincent's, Town of Vic Park, City of Subiaco, City of South Perth. portions of town of Cambridge, portions of City of Netherlands. That's the sort of general Perth Inner City Group 40 kilometre an hour project. But beyond that as well, there's still other councils, City of Canning, City of Stirling, that are also putting in lower speed limits as well at the moment to try and reduce the amount of people being killed and seriously injured.
When we hear from the community, there are a number of different perspectives, but some people are very much in favour of this, would like it to go on their local road, would like to see it in their local area. Why do you think there is such a diversity of views?
Absolutely. I think we've heard very strong voices for safer speeds on local streets. We've responded to that through the Perth Inner City Group, and we're looking at implementing that. And I think the diversity of views often comes from a person's stage in life as well. I think maybe a person that's a single person, adult, or just in a couple in a relationship, they generally, not everyone, would think about themselves and how they behave and how they would like to travel and how they think they're a safe driver and they can drive at what speed they want. But we've seen as people change, as they have kids themselves, or maybe as they have older parents that they have to then start caring for, and want to be out on the street more with the children or with the older people. We've seen attitudes change to realise, yes, I realise now that walking down the street and having to hold my child's hand really, really tightly in case it runs into the road is not a street that I really want to live on. I would like to be able to walk down the street with my child skipping ahead of me and know that it's generally okay and generally safe. So I think how people change in their life is change their attitudes to speed.
Tim, we have talked about inner city areas as perhaps being the place that a lot of this is being trialled, but this isn't just central Perth. This is something that some areas in outer suburban areas are trying, and also interstate, internationally. Tell me about how this experience is being picked up more broadly.
Yeah, so there's definitely suburbs within Perth that are outside of the sort of inner city metropolitan area that have looked at lower speeds and have reduced speed limits on local roads, which with some success. I don't have specific data at the moment on that, but people have said that they prefer the lower speeds, they prefer living on streets with lower speeds. Some streets have been physically changed to accommodate it, so we have a program of safe active streets throughout Perth, but it also extends to Geraldton and some of the I think they were looking at it in Bunbury as well, where the street is changed for slower speed for people to be able to ride safer on those streets. And again, initially they were fought with a bit of reaction from the public, and now people are enjoying living on these safe active streets because they've realised that slower speed creates much more amenity for people when they're on the street. And then looking nationally, over in Victoria, there's a number of suburbs that have reduced their speed limits to 40 kilometres an hour. Some have reduced to 30 kilometres an hour, again with some success. And internationally, Wales was the first country in the world to reduce all their local roads to 20 miles per hour, equivalent to 30 kilometres an hour. And that's going through a process at the moment to measure the success of what's happened there. One thing that all these reductions of speed limits on within the different countries and the different regions of Australia, a lot of them are born through the fact that people will always make mistakes, and if you make say you knock a glass over, lose your keys. People make mistakes every day in their life. If you make that mistake while you're driving, then the consequence is someone could be killed or seriously injured. So that's a big premise of reducing speeds, and why countries all over the world are looking to do it, because they understand people do make mistakes and we need to try and preempt those by creating the slower speeds.
If we were to go down this path, and I'm going to ask you to think about some of the international experience, which perhaps is a bit further ahead than us on some of these things, what would success look like in terms of a reduced, safer speed for local roads in Perth?
Apart from the obvious of less people being killed and seriously injured on the roads, I think success for 40 kilometres an hour on our local streets would look like more children walking and riding to school. Local councils investing more in the street amenity of the streets, more trees and benches, but also within other areas of the local councils where there's more economic activity, shops and restaurants and things. What we saw through the City of Vincent approach was reducing the speed to 40 kilometres an hour actually enabled local businesses to apply for al fresco dining, which they did, which then provides that economic uplift and that more economic return for reduced speeds through that area as well. So I think we'd have more vibrant town centres and more livable streets.
At the moment, local governments struggle to get major changes made across their road networks in terms of speed limits, because they often don't have the resources to do that whole of network review. And then the way the process works, they need to apply to main roads for approval for any change to speed limits. And if you're looking at a large number of roads, you need to have all that evidence to get that approvals through. The system is sort of more set up for that individual road analysis rather than that network-wide analysis. So a big focus for RAC is we're looking to see the state government investing more resources into equipping main roads to work with local governments to be able to assess their whole road networks, so the speed limits are not just the same that they were 50 years ago, but they've actually been proactively set to minimise the risk of harm, and they therefore sort of align with our 21st century expectations of being able to travel from A to B safely.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. If you liked this episode, let us know in the comments or share it with a friend, and don't forget to hit subscribe. We'll catch you in the next episode of RAC's Horizons podcast.